And we're live. Welcome to Office Hours with Arrow, a LinkedIn Live event hosted by Arrow leaders who care about what senior living looks like. I'm your host and producer, Rachel Sheehan, and today I'm so excited about this topic. We are going to be talking about our Memory Care Thoughtful Connections podcast. And so with me today, I have the three faces that put it all together. So I'm so excited to just talk through the whole thing. So first, Elizabeth, do you want to talk? You've been on my LinkedIn Live a couple times now, but will you reintroduce yourself and your connection to the podcast?
Yes, my name is Elizabeth Thompson. I am the Senior Regional Director of Memory Care at Arrow Senior Living. And I talk on the podcast with Charlie.
Hey.
Charlie, go ahead. Tell us who you are.
Hello, I'm Charlie Johnson. I'm the junior of the group. I'm the creative project coordinator. I'm the talking head of the podcast. I'm the guy that asked the questions.
I love it. Keep it rolling. And Lenny, we all know you, the face of Arrow. Tell us your connection to the podcast.
Well, I am not only just a face on the camera for Arrow Nicely News, I actually produce the podcast itself. And so all the technical part of it, I have a hand in when it comes to the recording of the audio, the recording of the video, editing it together, and then posting it out to the world for everyone to be able to listen to or watch. I do that.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're behind the camera this time. So a little different, but I love it. If you are listening to this and you haven't had a chance to listen to our podcast, it is an award-winning podcast too. So I do have to mention that, the 2024 Aspect Awards, first place. So that's really exciting, and just congrats to you guys for that. But why we're talking about this now is because we're about to launch season 2. And so we just want to get into all the background of the podcast and the inspiration and everything like that. So I'd love to start, Elizabeth, Charlie, with you, just talking about what inspired the podcast in the beginning. Like, where did this idea come from? How did it get started?
Well, actually, it started with Elizabeth, so I'm gonna let her talk first.
I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts a lot when I'm traveling, and I really wanted to do a podcast about dementia. Arrow is so amazing to offer so many different resources for education for anybody, and it's free out there. And so this was just another platform to do that. So, yeah.
Awesome.
And I think I got on board. I believe if I remember right, I received an email that says, "Charlie, you are the winner. You have been selected to moderate a brand new podcast that we're going to be doing on memory care." And that's how I became involved.
I love that. And I think, Charlie, I have to add Shannon's comment here, because she said, "Don't sell yourself short. You bring personal human experience and make this topic approachable and manageable." And I think that's a little bit about what we talked about. Tell us the vibe or the vision, goal of the podcast, how you guys, for those who haven't listened before, I mean, it's obvious to us what it's like, but kind of explain that to those listening today. What is the podcast vibe?
Casual conversation with Charlie and I. And, Charlie and I had met each other prior to doing the podcast, but it was just pretty formal, and now, I mean, Charlie, he's like family to me. When I am in Kansas City, I have dinner with him and his wife, and he's like family. I want to punch him sometimes, but
that's family.
When you went into this, and before we ever started, we knew that we wanted to do it in a non-clinical, relaxed format, so it could be easily understood, by anyone, whether they were listening or whether they were watching. And so that was really the goal, wasn't it, Elizabeth? From the start, that we wanted it. And in fact, I even think I remember talking about that. It was like as if we were sitting around the kitchen table and we're just having a conversation, and we wanted it to be as if people were listening to us having a conversation about the various topics that we were discussing.
And I think
Oh, hi, yeah. Oh, it's okay. I'm going to just jump in for a brief second, just because, it's very interesting, the dynamic between the two of them, and then you add me, because you got Elizabeth, who this is her passion, and then she has been educated wildly on this topic. Pair that with Charlie, who has a lot of personal experience with dementia, with his own family, and then me having no idea about any of it. And then whenever they're talking, I can be like, hey, I don't understand that. Can you clarify? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And so it's this great dynamic between the two of them, just, Elizabeth having that education, and then Charlie, of course, having firsthand experience with family members who have gone through the dementia journey. And so I just wanted to jump in and say that. That's as a listener, even though I'm recording, it's always just super fascinating conversation between the two of them. And I really have learned tons over the episodes. And if, me, who has nothing really, I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't experienced this yet outside of working for Arrow. And so I know that people, this will be beneficial to the people who actually are living this every day. And so that's kind of just what I wanted to say on that.
That's what I was going to touch on too. I think our target audience when we started this was caregivers, people who are still caring for someone at home, but it's really turned into a lot more than that. We've got staff that listen. We have families that I have a dear friend who doesn't have anyone in her family with dementia right now, but she loves listening to the podcast, and she actually gives me ideas for topics. So it's really there. We've got topics too that include, how to prevent dementia, and what kind of diet you need. So it's really for anybody.
Mm-hmm. And it's really, as you'd mentioned, Elizabeth, I mean, we were looking at helping family members to become more educated, to learn more about the dementias. As we've discussed, there are a multitude of different types of dementias, in order for them to make informed decisions. And that's really what it's all about, is to educate people and make them more informed about the various things, and so when the time comes, they can make educated decisions.
Yeah, and I think touching on the audience too, that's what we want to get across in this session today. Is this is a free resource for anybody. Like, it's not just Arrow staff, residents, caregivers, whatever. Anybody can listen to a podcast. That's the beautiful thing about it. So I think that's awesome that it's kind of transitioned from caregivers to, professionals to whoever.
What's interesting too about it is the fact that, like, you listen to some podcasts and there's like, something happened in the last one that you need to know about for this one. But that's not necessarily how our podcast is. Like, Elizabeth and Charlie have chosen a specific topic that is, pertains to something in the world, and they discuss that topic. And so if you are a person, a family member who's dealing with a specific type of thing that's happening with your person, that's in their dementia journey, you can go into our catalog basically and pinpoint exactly what that you can pull up to help you in that journey, in that day. And so that's another really fascinating thing about what we do that's separate than probably anybody else.
Yeah. And that brings up, do you want to give some examples of topics or your favorite topics from season 1 to kind of give examples to our listeners today? What kind of things you cover?
Sure. One of my favorites is therapeutic fibbing. I know a lot of people had not heard of that before, and we've had some good comments about that one. It's just a great topic for anyone who's trying to communicate with someone living with dementia. And so that was one of my favorite ones.
Well, real quick, tell us what that means.
Therapeutic fibbing. Basically, you're joining their reality. So if they think that their husband is still alive, then we want to join that reality, and it's okay in certain circumstances to therapeutic fib. It's not lying, to say, oh yeah, he's probably just at work. We'll probably see him later on today. And, rather than saying, well, he died and here's the obituary,
For sure. I think that's so helpful. So if you like that topic, go listen to that episode because that's really interesting. I love that. Charlie, how about you?
Well, as I was reviewing the 33, different episodes that we had in season one, I picked out 2 or 3 of my favorites. I think my all-time favorite, though, of the first season was called Caregiver Tips with Sandy. And this was when we had Sandy McGatha, our licensed clinical social worker that came in as a guest. And, one thing I want to talk about or want to mention is that we don't just focus on the individual with dementia. We also always like to turn and mention and discuss the caregiver as well, because they are oftentimes overlooked. So that was one of my favorites. Another one that I like, I think, because I'm kind of a little bit artsy, is the therapeutic power of creativity. That was another one of my favorites. And finally, and coming up on the holidays now, it was let's talk about the holidays and how to plan to make them meaningful. I think those were probably my top 3 out of the 33 that we did the first season.
Wow. I think that's an incredible sampling, because 33 podcast episodes is a lot of info. That's great. And then season 2, I know we'll get to that later. We'll get to more, but yeah.
Let me jump in, Rachel. I was going to say, it's funny because that Elizabeth had hers, Charlie had his, and mine are completely different than either of theirs. Mine, of course, well, not of course, but mine that I found fun was the technology element to it. We did an episode about like incorporating technology to help navigate like patterns. We did that. We talked about those things. We also talked about prevention, which Elizabeth did talk about, like, when it comes to eating and diet, exercise, consumption of drugs, like all of these things about what can kind of make it happen sooner. And then also how there was one about like practicing safety tips, like when you go out in the world, whenever you you take a family member out, and like kind of how you set yourself up for success in that environment or in that world. And though, again, I don't have a person yet that, I'm having to do that with, it was still just really great information as an outsider to be like, oh, like, you never know what anybody else is having to like go through or experience. And so like knowing that somebody is probably, having that experience or going through that journey with them, like then you can kind of be empathetic to other people out and about in the world. And so that's so funny that literally Elizabeth had some, Charlie had some, and mine just naturally were just all completely different. And that's what's great about this podcast, is the fact that like literally anyone, anywhere, whether you're in the healthcare world or not, like you're going to be affected by this in some way. And so this information is good to know, as we're all lifetime learners, correct? So this information is great to ingest.
For sure. And actually, that's one of the comments Mandy left here, is just about running into somebody who she passed on the podcast to, somebody whose mom, has Alzheimer's. So I think that happened recently. Elizabeth, Charlie, do you want to give examples too of maybe when that happened to you?
Sure. Most recently, mine, I was actually visiting Ohio, and I was on my flight back home. And what do you know? I sit next to an older couple. I'm just drawn to older people, I think. But anyway, this couple sitting beside me, and I can tell the wife is struggling a little bit. And we just start talking, and she's needing a charger because she's wanting to play a game on her phone, and she's run out of battery. And so I'm like, I've got a charger, and I give it to her. And they're like, what do you do? And I tell them, and her husband's like, you need to talk to her. She's got that. So I ended up sharing my business card, which has the podcast QR code on it. And we talked for a long time, but it's neat. You just don't realize how many people are faced with dementia.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you told me about your business card. I was thinking we need podcast t-shirts with the QR on our back.
Yes.
Shannon's in the chat too. I'm
That's a
telling you now, that would be great. But Charlie, how about you?
Well, I just recently had a doctor's appointment, and our conversation, for whatever reason, turned to dementia. And I had shared with my doctor about watching my mother go through all the stages and all the changes that she went through. And my doctor shared about a female patient that she has that has dementia. Anyway, this patient comes from a very modest family, and she was telling me that this patient had started having very sexual um, uh, thoughts and feelings and actions with herself, but also with others. And this was very troubling to her family. They were embarrassed by it. They were worried by it. They didn't know what to do about it. And the doctor, of course, explained to them, what was happening in the brain and the fact that she didn't have the control over that. And so I was able to share with my doctor about our podcast, but more specifically, I was able to tell her about episode 32, which is entitled Sexual Expression in the World of Dementia. And she was very pleased to have this new resource to share with this family.
I love that. I love that. And that's what this is all about, relaunching and getting the awareness out so more people will listen and just have those resources. But I do want to talk about, too, the process you all go through in case anybody listening wants to start their own podcast or something like that. So first, obviously, where does the idea come from, the topics? How does it go? Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Yeah, usually I choose the topics. Again, I have a great friend who is an avid listener, and she always has suggestions for me or questions that I can come up with a topic regarding. Also, our listeners, their ideas are a great way for us to figure out what topics will be next. And then I shoot them to Charlie.
Yeah. She sends me the topics. Of course, I have no idea about any of them. So I have to do some research so I can formulate some intelligent sounding questions, and of course write the intro and outro to those, and then I send them back to her, and then we actually then have to finalize the questions and also the direction of the discussion. Oftentimes that is done even the day of the recording. So it's kind of a back and forth, and we kind of decide where we're going with it, and like I say, oftentimes it's right up to the day of recording that we finalize that.
Yeah, we just did that last week. I had a topic of dementia and hearing, and he went one way with the questions, and we were backlogged, and so we couldn't talk until the day of. And I was like, really, I wanted to go from preventative. And he's like, oh, okay. So we wing it.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful part where Lenny comes in with the editing, right? So Lenny, talk about your process a little bit too.
Well, creating a podcast is fun and nerve-wracking, and like all of these sounds you're putting in your ears, so you have to be like very cognizant of like what kind of things you're doing to your ears. But this Thoughtful Connections is actually my 4th or 5th podcast that I've produced since 2016. I was on a radio show in California that I ran. I was the host of. We were on that for a couple of years before we then turned it into a podcast after the fact. And then COVID hit in 2020. And so we were no longer able to go to a studio to do all of these things. And so after a few months, I figured, how on earth do I like keep this going, but not from a studio? So then I ended up buying a bunch of equipment, microphones, mixer, and figuring out how to do it from there. And so this one particularly, I wanted to up the production value when it comes to not just a podcast, but have a video element to it. So therefore, we have cameras, we've got different angles. We added even a 4th camera in this week. So there's like a bird's eye view of them. It's pretty ridiculous. I absolutely love it. I'm like looking at it now. I'm like, how many times can I cut back to the bird's eye view just to see them like sitting in the chairs and doing things? The technology has gotten so great. Like the cool thing with Spotify specifically, if you go and listen to our podcast on Spotify, you actually can watch it through the app. So like you just have to click, I want to watch it instead of just listen to it. And then you can actually watch it through that way. And so on my end, it's really easy. Like as long as I set everything up and press record and make a giant clapping sound at the very beginning, just to get all the sound synced up, it's really easy. And then I go through and when I edit, I listen, I watch, I cut back and forth. It's kind of just like producing like a TV show in a sense. And it's with them too, it's really easy. I just have to make sure I'm not like making any sounds or laughing or, doing anything like that to disrupt them. There are some times where it's funny where like I'm giving them a countdown, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes or whatever. And so they'll just glance at me and just give me some kind of look. And I'm like, oh, okay, no, you guys are doing great. But, you got 2 minutes to wrap this up, And so it's really funny to watch them do that and to do their thing. It's enjoyable.
I was going to say, it could be hard to not laugh around these two. So
right, exactly. And then sometimes Elizabeth or Charlie will like mention me as a person there. And it's like, they don't see me, guys. Like you can't include me because they have no idea I'm here.
We can't ignore you, Lenny. I mean, you're just amazing. And I learned something from this LinkedIn live call. I didn't know that on Spotify we could see the video. I'm kind of nervous now. I'm like, oh, you got to tell me if I was lipstick on my teeth.
Oh, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Well, one thing that we didn't talk about is how much fun that we have doing these. When we're pretty serious during the recording, but prior to, let me just say, after we have our initial greetings when we meet, and we usually meet about once a month or a little more, because we usually record about 6 sessions or 6 episodes at a time. But when we meet, of course, we have our initial greeting, and then we start what I call the podcast banter. And we banter amongst ourselves or with whomever happens to be around. And this continues the entire 5 or 6 hours that we're in the studio. And so we have a great time while we're there. And it certainly has worked into building a great friendship and rapport between all of us.
I love that. And because you guys don't all live in the same area. So you come together monthly, you said?
Yeah. Monthly, about 5 or 6 weeks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We usually try to record 6 at a time. I think we started with 4 and we thought, we can do more. And so we did 6. And then one time we decided we would try and record 8. That was too much.
They tried to
that
kill
was
me.
A long day. That day was a long day.
Long day,
so
no voice.
We hit a sweet spot of 6 per whenever we sit down and record them.
Yes,
but again, it's all about like the work that they do before they show up on having the questions, having, the topics and knowing exactly kind of where they want to navigate it. I said earlier that like, I'll give them a countdown of like, how much time they have left, but like, I haven't really had to do that since the first, few batches and just like the first episode this other time, because like the way that they navigate the topics and the questions, like literally it flows to where the timing of it works out perfectly each time they go through. So it is really kudos to both Elizabeth and Charlie for like literally like clockwork, having the conversations, hitting the points that they want to hit, and then, getting to the outro, getting to that stuff in a timely fashion. So it's like, they're so great.
It's just gotten better and better, I guess. So
So go listen to these things, yo.
Well, it truly, if you were to listen to the first 1 or 2 and then compare those to the end of season 1, I think it's a noticeable improvement, I would say.
For sure.
I think that's just our relationship has grown too. It's more comfortable. We wanted it to feel like sitting at the kitchen table having a conversation, and now it truly is. We're not at the kitchen table; we're at the coffee table. But it's truly, that's what it is.
And
I want to.
and I add, Elizabeth truly is the expert, but I do not hesitate in calling her out if she says the wrong word or says something crazy. So just know that I do call her out and look forward to doing so.
And that's why sometimes she wants to punch you, right?
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Oh, for sure. I also want to state that, like, Elizabeth is the expert here, but like Charlie's actual like hands-on experience with his mom and his mother-in-law like add such a great dynamic to the podcast, because like you really can feel exactly what Charlie's journey was, is, and then how to kind of relate to it and kind of know what and how to navigate that if you're experiencing it yourself, because Elizabeth is there to say, how did you handle it, Charlie, at that moment? What would you have done differently? Here's the science and the stuff behind it to say this is the direction, and Charlie talking about the fact that with his own mom, it was, I believe in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And then with his mother-in-law, it was more recent. And so there was a time gap to be able to kind of reflect on his experience throughout the two different journeys, if that makes sense. And we hear that inside the podcast, all over the podcast, that's stamped all over it. And I think that's another just element that, again, makes what we do here with Thoughtful Connections different and valuable to the listener.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. So switching gears a little bit, I just want to look forward to season 2. So are there any topics you all want to tease and tell us? Because when does it drop?
Every Monday in November.
Monday, yeah, because Alzheimer's Awareness Month, starting tomorrow. So Mondays in November, tease some topics. I'm dying to know.
I have 2 that I'm excited about. Well, I'm excited about all of them, but one is pain and dementia. That one's really near and dear to my heart because there's a lot of unaddressed pain for people who are living with dementia. And a lot of times that's why we see these expressions or behaviors. And the other one is alcohol-related dementia. Those are my 2 I'm excited about.
Speaking of alcohol-related dementia, my doctor says she sees that a lot. And I had mentioned to her that was one of our podcasts as well. And she says that it often goes undiagnosed, as we talk about in the podcast. But she says that she herself sees it a lot because her patients do not tell her about it. But she says, I see it in the lab results. And so she says once they're confronted, they most often, will admit to the fact of the use of alcohol. But she goes, yeah, that's more prevalent than what we realize. I'll share a couple. Did you share 2? Let me share 2. Here's one. I think this will be the first one to drop on Monday, November 4th. Time to take the car keys. That's one. That's a good one. In fact, I think it may be time for Elizabeth to quit driving. I've seen her on the road. That's one. And let's see, what's another one? Here's one. Dementia's effects on taste and smell. And okay, Lindy, you want to tell them about one? We've almost covered them all. You got one?
I'll be honest. I'm actually excited for all of them. I'm also excited for the technology that I'm including in it, like these bird's eye views, all the different. I've upped my camera game, so it's going to look cleaner. It's going to look crisper. It's going to sound awesome on the technical side. I just wanted to drop these little nuggets too, real quick before we have to go. Yeah. We've reached over 6,000 people with our podcast, and we have over 18,000 impressions on Spotify alone with this first season of the podcast. So I'm just really grateful, really thankful for you all, and thankful for this platform that we're giving out to everyone. And I hope everybody, consumes it.
Yeah. So everyone listening, you have the weekend to catch up on 33 episodes and then we start again. So it's going to be great. Where can we find, besides Spotify, where can we find the podcast?
Anywhere you listen to podcasts, literally anywhere you stream or listen to a podcast.
Cool. I'll put it in the comments as well after this, but everyone, thank you so much. I think we did it. This was amazing. I'm excited to listen to season 2. So thank you for just sharing the experience and all the background of the podcast.
Just remember, looking for thoughtful connections, a memory care podcast.
That is straight from the recording there. That is the voice. I love it. Thank you all so much. And we'll be back next week. Bye.
Bye.